Hello, this is Gonzalo Lira speaking to you live, and this is the Roundtable, the second episode of this new show that I'm doing. Oops, sorry about that, a little technical snafu. Anyway, this is a new show that is basically a discussion program, and we're going to have three guests today. My guests are Maria Dubovikova, David Kurten, and George Szamuely. Now, the Maria is a expert commentator, especially focusing on the Middle East, but also on Europe, on European political situation, and she's been published in various alternative media sources. David Curtin is, of course, the former driving force in UKIP, and now with the Heritage Party, which is a nascent party that's had a few run-ins with Sadiq Khan. That'll be very interesting, and we'll discuss that. And George Szamuely is a journalist, an author. He wrote a very interesting book called "Bombs for Peace: NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia." And we're going to be discussing today the geopolitical situation, specifically in Europe. And I wanted to start off, since I have two Brits here with me, we're going to be talking about what is going on with the Tory party, if you don't mind my asking. George, take it away.
Well, I'm sure David knows more about this than I do. I think he's closer to it. My impression as things stand is that the runoff will be between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, and two extraordinarily uninspiring and unimpressive candidates, neither of whom has the slightest ability to relate to the British public, certainly not the voters who turned to Boris Johnson in December 2019. I probably think that Liz Truss might actually pull it through, because I just can't see the Tories going for an investment banker, a hedge fund manager. I mean, that's just political suicide. They might just go for Liz Truss, and I would expect Liz Truss to be very much like Theresa May, and will lead the Tories into a catastrophic defeat. I mean, that's how I see it now. But again, David probably is closer to it than I am.
Yeah, well, I actually do know one of the candidates, or one who's just the one who was eliminated today. It was Kemi Badenoch, because when I was on the London Assembly, I was there for 5 years. The first year I was there, she was on the London Assembly too, and I sat next to her for a year. And she's a very nice lady, but very intelligent. And she was the only person who was left in the race that was anywhere near like what a conservative should be, an old school social conservative. And she wasn't perfect. I don't agree with her on anything. I'm not supporting her because I'm in a different party. But I've said I think she would have been the least worst option. But all the others are absolutely terrible. And Boris was bad. I mean, he was elected in 2019 to get Brexit done. And that was his 3-word mantra. He repeated it over and over and over again. And that's why he got elected, because that was the big issue in 2019. And he did the deal with the European Union. I don't think it was a very good deal, to be honest. It leaves a lot of unfinished business. But he did that, and we officially left the European Union. But then since then, he's been absolutely appalling with lockdowns, with injections, with his stance on Ukraine, that is leading the country into economic oblivion. So, there was so much dissatisfaction with him that he had to go. So Rishi Sunak was the person who stuck the knife in and started off the leadership contest. So he's calculated that he's going to win.
There's this issue in British politics that the guy who sticks the knife in is not always the guy who winds up with the top job.
That's very insightful. It's true with Michael Heseltine. Remember Heseltine, who did in Thatcher, but he wasn't the one who succeeded Thatcher.
Who did in Theresa May? Michael Gove?
No, I think she just Cameron resigned on the day after the referendum. 24th of June 2016. So that was he was going to he thought that he'd win the referendum for his side and the UK would vote to stay in the European Union.
Yeah. But
leave,
who buried Theresa May?
At the end, she lost the European election in 2019, and essentially she kind of had to go because the Tory results in that election was so bad. They came in 4th place, which is unheard of.
I remember that election very well. They had everything going, and so here's the situation: we've had David Cameron, then Theresa May, then Boris Johnson, and now we're going to have a fourth prime minister from the Tory party. Maria, you're in Moscow. What do people in Russia think of this revolving door of leadership in not only in Great Britain, but also we're starting to see it in Germany and Italy as well? What's your take there?
Russians cannot judge the situation by any means because it's not their country. But we can talk about that regarding the perspective for geopolitics and the global situation. There is a joke that now it's a fight between the feminism and BLM movement.
Okay.
So, and it's not clear who will win at all. There are ideas that Rishi Sunak is the least preferable for Russia since his election might impact Russia's ties with India. Mm-hmm. Because now the nationalists leading the country there, and nationalism in India is predetermined by the religion, and Rishi Sunak is Hinduist. Mm-hmm. So, in this sense, the opposition in India might take a lead in the processes inside the country and less moving India further from Russia and more towards Britain. From this sense, Russia is not interested in Rishi Sunak election. Regarding the mistrust, she's really I absolutely agree with my colleagues that she will be likely like the new Theresa May, but her election will be really strategically complicated for everybody regarding the situation in Ukraine and regarding the global security, taking into account her stances on China. So, it's like two evils, I think, but I don't know which is the best.
Well, I think the Russians.
Go ahead, George. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that the day that Johnson resigned, I think Peskov said something like, "Well, he didn't like us very much. We don't like him very much either."
Well, the thing about Truss, what's her name, Liz Truss, she's an idiot. I mean, she's a complete fool. I mean, it's frankly embarrassing, and she wants to, she has aspirations to being the next Margaret Thatcher, and she fails miserably. And I think that the embarrassing part was when Lavrov asked her sarcastically whether she accepted that Rostov and Voronezh were part of Russia. And she said, no, absolutely, we will never accept that, which is, for those of you who don't know geography, those are two long-standing regions of Russia. It was absurd. And it was, in the West, they tried to frame it, the Western press tried to frame it as some sort of gotcha moment, that it was a trap that Lavrov blamed it. No, it was just a casual, sarcastic comment. But the question, I mean, what about Penny Mordaunt? Mordaunt? How do you pronounce it?
Mordaunt. I mean, when I hear that, I think of Mordor from Lord of the Rings. Yes. A creature from that kingdom. Essentially, but she would be dreadful, just like the other two. I mean, she's the one who is the most woke, if you like. So she's the one that's been pushing for trans rights and self-gender identity. Now she's rowing back and she's saying that she didn't do that, but there's a lot of evidence that she did. And actually, in 2018, she published a 75-point LGBT plus action plan, and her name is on it, and she's sent it out. So
So we have feminism, we have LGBTQ, and we have BLM.
Yeah, right. So they would all be dreadful. But I honestly, she's number 2 at the moment, but it's looking like she isn't going to make the cut for the final 2 because it seems that the people who now Kimi Badenoch's dropped out. Most of the people who voted for her, well, where do they go? They're all terrible, but they're most likely to go to Liz Truss because apparently she's seen as someone who's on the right of the Conservative Party, but she's not at all socially conservative. She's been essentially a neocon hawk, and that's the worst definition of conservative you can. I mean, it puts most people to shame. And she says she wants to cut taxes, but she's going to do that by increasing borrowing, which is not conservative either, which is why she actually allowed Rishi Sunak, who is the most socialist of them all, to actually allow him to accuse her of being a socialist because she'd increased the national debt. So, they're all absolutely...
Could I ask David, something I don't know. I mean, it's a question. Why are the British so preoccupied with all these issues, these LGBTQ issues? I mean, they're passing some legislation now about banning gay conversion therapy. I mean, actually banning it. Now, you can say it's undesirable and so on, but why are they preoccupied with banning something? Shouldn't that be somehow left between patient and doctor? I mean, if somebody wants this therapy, then they should be able to have this therapy. But no, they have to outlaw this therapy. And I don't understand. And I think Liz Truss is one of the people who said, this gay conversion therapy is absolute monstrosity, barbaric. I don't understand what's going on here. So.
Yeah, she is. Her and Penny Mordaunt the same. They both think that about this. Yeah, it's an issue. And I think I'm the only UK party leader who's actually said, no, this shouldn't happen. People should have the choice what therapy they want to. But you see, you've got some very, very powerful LGBT lobby groups who for 10 years or so, no one dared question them. They had the ear of the government, of all the political parties. One of them is called Stonewall. You probably have it all over the world in different places. And they're pushing this, and it's their agenda. And the government basically, they say jump, the government says how high, and they do exactly what they wanted, which is why Penny Mordaunt, when she was the Equalities Minister, published this 75-point action plan. But so they're going through an agenda, a progressive agenda. So first of all, it's civil partnerships, then it's same-sex marriage, then it's the normalization of transgenderism. Now it's banning conversion therapy. But what they're doing with that is conflating things that are already banned, which are horrific, like electroshock therapy and coercive rape and so on. Yeah, obviously those are banned. That happened 50 years, 100 years ago. It doesn't happen anymore. But they're trying to ban even people from talking about it, doing sort of, sit-down counseling or pastoral care in churches, because I think these people are so totalitarian. They want to actually stop free speech on this issue and close down anybody who has a different political opinion to these lobbying groups like Stonewall and so on. So unfortunately, all the big political parties are too afraid to actually stand up and counter this, or even, give any kind of credible argument against it.
Maria, I heard recently that Russia passed a law outlawing the whole issue of discussing LGBTQ plus ideology. Can you fill us in on that? I mean, they seem to have gone in the 180-degree opposite direction.
It's a matter of, it's not even discussion, it's a matter of propaganda. Russia has banned LGBTQ plus propaganda in Russia. And that's true because like with all these developments happening in all around the country, Russia is trying to become a kind of island of peace, of religion, of traditions, of values. And it's a matter of concept of consolidation around identity. And Russian identity is built majorly on religion, on Orthodox religion, and mentality is much predetermined by it. So it's the tendency that the church started already playing a major role in many processions. I don't remember such level of religious talking and people that getting back to churches and start praying. So as I see now, since the start of the military operation since 21st of February, now religion has become already part of the society. it's something really extraordinary. And
really?
yes, it's absolutely unexpected for me, and something totally new that's happening. And it's very interesting to witness how the society is changing, how the people are changing, and how this society is turning towards its roots. So, including the religion. So, and the LGBTQ is considered something that is not Russian, as something that goes going against tradition, against values, and that's why it has to be eradicated.
Now, let me ask you something, Maria, if you don't mind. The West basically had a forcible divorce with Russia. All of a sudden, because of the special military operation, they cut ties, economic ties, cultural ties, the very, very ugly Russophobia, which I personally found shocking. And I think that most right-minded people, right-minded, fair-minded people would agree with me that it was shocking that all of a sudden this visceral hatred towards Russia manifested itself in Europe. And had it been for any other group, everybody would have been outraged. But for Russia, it was considered okay and, in fact, socially acceptable. And so my question to you, Maria, is people in Russia obviously saw this. People in Russia obviously must have had a reaction to it. Is this turn towards tradition, this turn towards anti-LGBTQ and anti-progressive Western values, is this do you think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you think that this is sort of like a direct reaction to this forcible divorce from the West?
I wouldn't say that this divorce has started this year in February. This divorce has started long before. And actually, this divorce started from the Munich Security Conference 2007, when Vladimir Putin has delivered a speech that was a turning point in everything. And this was the start of this divorce. Then it was intensified in 2014, and it was escalating till February 2022. But the most the strongest impact on the society of this divorce really became visible exactly since February, and because it was the first time when the word patriot has become not an insult, but something to be proud of. And that's something that I like. Not many would understand, but since the collapse of the Soviet Union, like the dignity, the national pride of the country was seriously damaged, and the nationality, the feeling of being a Russian was seriously damaged. There was nothing to be proud of, and there were serious developments inside the country with the arrival of Putin into power, but still the society was not consolidated at all. And the challenges that emerged since 2014, the Russian Spring, this reemergence of this feeling of the national pride, started these changes, fundamental changes inside the society, but they were touching a very certain number of people, not all the society. So it was like the core of this trend, but still the word patriot was as an insult. So to be patriotic, it was meaning like you are stupid, you are arrogant, or whatever. It was much more popular to be liberal, because if you are liberal, it means that you are with Europe. But since the start of the military operation, since the start of the reaction of the West, of the sanctions, of this extreme Russophobia, even my very liberal friends, they started saying that, like, it's crazy what's going on. Why should I say sorry for being Russian? Why I should be blamed for being Russian, insulted for being Russian? And even this part of the society started changing. And for example, even Dmitry Fenin, who is the head of the Carnegie Russia, he changed a lot in his analysis. And even, if I'm not mistaken, Anatol Levin was writing an article asking, questioning himself, why even the liberal part of the society of Russia has become turned to the state and to the nation. But it's really like the current developments has shown that this hatred that has been always existing towards Russia in Europe, in the West, because if we look through the posters from the beginning of the century or in the 19th century, Russia was always depicted as a kind of evil, and it was always in the mindset. So just now people have stopped, I mean, the governments have stopped pretending that it's like it's our friend or potential friend or whatever. So it was a game changer, and people have witnessed that and understood that there are no allies in Russia except its own people, its army and fleet, as Alexander I has stated. So, yeah.
George?
Yeah, no, I think everything Maria is saying is very interesting because remember, during the Cold War, the story was, well, we absolutely love the Russian people. It's communism that we hate, and it's Soviet Union, Soviet expansionists. That's all. But the Russian people, we absolutely adore them. Dostoevsky, love him. Chekhov, love him. Tchaikovsky, love him. And now suddenly the mask has fallen off. I mean, it wasn't about communism. It wasn't about the Soviet Union. You really didn't like Russia, and as Maria points out, this goes back a long way. I mean, it goes back in the 19th century with the British, the Great Game, the so-called Russian barbaric people. They had this barbaric regime. Then they kind of changed their view, but not because they changed their view about Russia itself, but they needed Russia because then suddenly Germany became the big threat, and so they needed Russia against Germany. And again, they used Russia very cynically. I mean, they knew perfectly well that Russia couldn't possibly fight Germany in 1914, but they needed Russia essentially as cannon fodder to give the British and the French time to be able to fight back against Germany. So that it's a very interesting what you're saying. But one thing that I want to ask Maria is that I'm sure you watched that show, Solovyev's show, Evening. You don't watch it?
No, I don't watch TV at all.
Anyway, very wise.
What is wrong with you?
Vladimir Solovyev, it's called Evening. He's a TV talk show host. He's of the American talk show host. But what I think is interesting in the attitude that they display, which is that they kind of despise Lenin, everything that Lenin did to Russia. Lenin just basically screwed over Russia and everything. But they do have respect for Stalin, and they respect Stalin not because they like the terror and everything else. They think that essentially Stalin restored Russian national pride, and that wasn't just simply, when he did that famous the toast to the Russian people in 1945, just after the war, he said the greatest nation of the USSR, which caught everyone by surprise. But they actually argue that he did more than that. He actually did, restore a certain pride. He restored the churches. He restored religion. And then after Stalin's departure, the communists went back to persecuting the Orthodox Church. I think it's a very, very interesting argument that they've presented. Maria, I don't know whether have you come across these arguments?
I didn't see them, but I know it's very interesting inside the society that there are even people who are still admiring Lenin and communism and revolution, all these things, but Stalin is a very complicated figure for the Russians because there are many families that suffer their repressions, and it's something like awful and undeniable. And even some people might say that, okay, you are blaming Stalin, but who wrote all these papers to the government, complaints. But still, his figure is quite difficult to evaluate without hurting somebody's feelings.
But I think the reason, just to follow up on that, is Stalin left the country much stronger. See, they look at Lenin and say, Lenin destroyed the country. I mean, he signed the humiliating peace agreement. Putin mentioned that, Brest-Litovsk. He said he signed Brest-Litovsk. Yeah, There's no need for him. The only reason he signed Brest-Litovsk is he wanted power. That's the only reason. But Stalin, he actually made the country stronger. So Yeah, I mean, no one defends his terror. I mean, at least the thinkers that I'm quoting, but they say he made the country strong. He made the country feared around the globe.
Yeah, there's that famous Chou En-lai, the premier of China, had that famous saying. He was asked, "What do you think of the French Revolution?" And he said, "It's too soon to tell."
Yeah.
And I think that might be the issue with Stalin. You know, it's simply too soon to tell. Just as with Putin, for instance, obviously it's undeniable, I think, at this point, whether you like him or hate him, Putin is a world historical figure who has transformed Russia in a way that is remarkable. And whatever you think of him, he will be remembered as one of the great leaders of Russia, right up there with Catherine the Great and Peter and Stalin and Lenin. But the thing that I want to focus on a little bit is I want to go back a little bit to Britain and tie it in with Russia. You know, David, I heard some British general basically saying that the UK is going to have to at some point fight Russia. Is this a prevalent thought? Are people actually thinking, oh yeah, the UK is going to have to deploy troops? Are they high? What's going on?
This is this new general that's just come in at the middle of June. I can't remember his name actually now. General Sir.
I think it's something like Sanders. Isn't it Sanders or something?
Sanders,
like
I think. Yes.
Yeah.
I should have prepared that. Please forgive me. But go ahead. We know more or less who we're talking about.
He's new, so he's completely new. You know, and he said this. He's parroting the line that some of the really crazy war hawks and warmongers want, is to actually think that, well, we're going to go in and fight Russia. He's almost talking as though we're already at war with Russia when we're not. I mean, no one's actually declared war. As officially, we're not even involved, although they are actually sending weapons and military support and what they call lethal aid to Ukraine all the time. So, but officially, they're still, fighting a proxy war. But he comes along and then suggests, well, we're actually going to fight and win, which is absolutely crazy. But I despair at some of the rhetoric that's coming from these people. And what I think about this guy is, I hope that it was just making, for example, his maiden speech, his first speech as the new general of the army, wanted to get noticed, make a bit of an impression. So he said something that's completely outrageous in order to sort of cement his position as the new chief of the army and get noticed. I hope that's what it was. And actually, when he gets down to business, he'll actually be a lot more sensible and he won't say any more ridiculous things like this. But I wonder, because, it goes all the way to the top. I mean, we talked about Liz Truss earlier, and when this situation started in February, she was encouraging people to go and fight in Ukraine and be mercenaries. And she said, we want to crush and cripple the Russian economy, which is really insane rhetoric and inflammatory rhetoric for someone to use who's the foreign secretary. And it's certainly not for the best interests of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, because she's potentially making us a target for nuclear weapons. I mean, so...
Well, it also, if I call somebody, a warmonger, an evildoer, and blah, 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 then it becomes impossible for me to later negotiate with him. And so whenever I hear these foreign policy, these heads of foreign affairs for the various countries, for Germany, for NATO, for Great Britain, for France, demonizing Putin, demonizing Russia generally, I say, how are you later going to be able to negotiate? And the thing is, see, from my point of view, and I want to turn this conversation to this situation, Europe's economy is collapsing. It's very clear that Germany is not going to have enough natural gas, or food for that matter, for this winter. What's going on in Europe? I mean, what drug are they taking, and what's the number for the dealer? That's what I want
to. I think they're going to need more than drugs to see them through the winter. You do. I mean, they're doing everything wrong. I mean, this is not the first thing that they're doing which is harming the economy. I mean, first of all, you've got this whole net zero insanity, this climate alarmism, and that's been going on for 10 or 20 years. And so, Germany, especially after Fukushima in Japan, they decided they're going to close all their nuclear power stations and have an Energiewende, as they say in German, to change from nuclear to wind and solar. We're all going to have renewable energy, and it's going to be a wonderful utopian future. But nobody did the maths. Or people who did do the maths were derided by these progressives and these green enthusiasts, and saying that no, you're going to want to continue polluting the world, and you need to shut up, otherwise we're all going to die from climate change. I mean, so that's the first thing. Then you had the whole COVID situation and the lockdown, and that destroyed the economy. It destroyed so many small and medium-sized businesses on top of the net zero craziness. And then you've got the response to the special operation in the Donbass, which is just blown out of all proportion, and they're essentially trying to stoke up a war, but they're not even thinking. They're almost this groupthink to some extent. I think you've got different levels of people, and some people are actually useful idiots, and they can't think beyond what they get coming at them from the television. And they just actually genuinely think that they're doing the right thing because they can't be bothered to research into, what happened with the National Socialists shelling the Russians in the Donbass for the last 8 years. They don't care about that. But I think some people are there. They're making a lot of money out of it. And so they're stoking up the tensions because they are invested in businesses, or they've got friends who are invested in businesses that are making a lot of money. And we know Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Hunter Biden and all that. That's just one of the people that's involved that is coming out now, and we know all about. I think there's other people who have got an even more sinister agenda, which is to introduce a global government, global system of digital identity, social credit control, where we won't have any cash, but there'll just be central bank digital currency run by the World Bank and the World Economic Forum. And this is just another chance and an opportunity to continue the agenda that they've implemented quite a lot of during the COVID lockdowns. So there's those different levels of people who are pushing this. But it leads to some very bellicose and unhelpful rhetoric as well.
Yeah, George?
Yeah, no, incidentally, I read today that Germany is planning on reintroducing the masks in September. So that sounds like the lockdowns are going to come back. We thought that the COVID lockdowns, that's a kind of something that's in the past. We're never going to go back to them. So looks like we could easily go back to them because the rulers, they kind of like it. They like the idea of controlling everybody's lives, everything that they do, everything they say, and they don't want to let it go. I mean, that's the nature of power. Once you have it, you just don't want to let go of it. And that's this extraordinary thing. I mean, if you look at what the pronouncements of Josep Borrell or Ursula von der Leyen is, that none of them ever actually explains, why are we doing all this? They say, well, we're going to do this to Russia, we're going to do that to Russia, Russia's going to soon be suffering, and that's going to teach them a lesson, and so on and so forth. We have to sacrifice for Ukraine, but they never explain why. What's Ukraine for us? I mean, you are supposed to be representative of the peoples of Europe. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Ukraine is not a member of the European Union. No one has ever said that the security of Ukraine is a vital national interest of any country in Europe. So why are you inflicting all this pain? Why are you ready to bring the entire world economy to its knees for Ukraine? And they never explain it. Josep Borrell, he keeps issuing these blogs and like, everything is great. Russians are lying and lying, but sooner rather than later, they're going to start suffering, and they're going to learn their lesson. When they start starving. Well, why are you doing this? And unfortunately, the media, that part of the same bubble, they never ask those questions. Why are you doing this? And we've never had an answer to that.
No, what's interesting was today, Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, he gave a speech where he said the most interesting line. He said, you will have to pay to punish Russia, but it wasn't we have to pay to secure liberty and all this nonsense. It's you, the people. And I'm wondering, if I'm a European, why do I have to pay for somebody else's problem? I don't understand. And the thing that I do not understand is why are they committing economic suicide? Now, there seems to be two camps. One camp claims that it's all part of a big conspiracy. It's a controlled demolition. And the other camp believes that it's just incompetence and incompetent people doubling down on bad decisions. Maria, from your point of view in Russia, what does it look like to you? Do you think that this is part of a master plan on the part of the Europeans, or they're just stupid and just crashing their own economy and their own continent? You tell me what people in Russia believe.
I would say, as what political analysts believe, there is a belief that it's a matter of incompetence. Because if we look how the people are even, put in the positions, how they are, promoted, and etc., it's not a matter of their competencies. It's a matter of their ideology, of their gender, or whatever. So, and it's very interesting because I was thinking recently that traditionally, if we look at the, at realism and liberalism, I mean, in terms of theory of international relations, traditionally the most hawkish people, like for those who are like more into realpolitik, into realism, who defend the national interests, etc., and liberals, neoliberals, they were always considered the most moderate ones, those who are ready to negotiate and to talk. But what we are witnessing now, the situation is totally different. Meir Shemer, the most famous scientist who is like apologist of realpolitik, he is more adequate and more peaceful in his statements and his him explaining the conflict than all the liberal even experts and politicians that are now in the leadership of different countries. And that's quite interesting and strange. And the huge problem that now the ideology of climate change, the ideology of LGBTQ, ideology of crushing Russia, even because it's already a part of our ideology somehow, because as long as Russia is considered to be a barbarian state and Europe is, where the West is like a civilized world, so to destroy Russia, it means to win, or so the West is winning, so the civilized world is winning. But in this ideological blindness prevents them from thinking rationally. So rational thinking is dead. Critical thinking is dead among the people even.
Right.
So,
yeah, I mean, I could just follow up on what Maria said. But in a way, it's not anything new, because if you look through history, I mean, the realists, let's say like the realist presidents like Eisenhower and Nixon, they were very restrained in their foreign policy. Eisenhower sat on his hands at the time of Hungary, didn't want to get involved in Vietnam. He kind of thought this is a bad idea. It was the Kennedy-Johnson team that came in 1961 that said, we've got this message, we believe in liberal ideas and so on. We're going to win this war of ideas. We're going to take on Khrushchev and we're going to, do this. And then it was an absolute catastrophe what they did. And then it required, again, a realist like Nixon to kind of go back to, again, a restrained foreign policy, wrap up Vietnam, and then pursue a sensible kind of détente policy with the Soviet Union. And what happened is that these what were called the neocons were kind of ex-liberals who kind of went over to the kind of Republican side, and then they absolutely made havoc. I mean, they made havoc with Ronald Reagan, and they made especially havoc with George W. Bush in Iraq, and that that's influence on there. But in a way, there's always been the liberals who have this kind of missionary idea. Today it's LGBTQ. back then it was the idea of the liberal revolution. Everyone in the world must be a liberal. They had that ideologue Wolf Rostow back in the 1960s. We're going to have this global democratic revolution. So they've always been the kind of the warmongers, led their countries in the world to disaster, and it's been the realists, the kind of conservatives, because Eisenhower, Nixon were conservatives, who said, look, let's just pursue our own national interest. Don't go off on a kind of a wild goose chase, with missionary zeal.
Well, what I'm noticing is that you're absolutely right, both of you, that it's ideological. And what's really interesting is that now this leadership, this very highly ideological leadership, is getting a lot of popular pushback. Now, I wanted to mention the fact that the Dutch farmers went on strike because of the crazy climate targets that were, from the top down imposed on them for no reason whatsoever on the nitrogen output, which is absurd. And they have gone on strike. It's been a mess in the Netherlands. Full disclosure, I lived a couple of years in the Netherlands. I moved back here to Ukraine in late 2020. So I know the Netherlands fairly well. I've been all over the country. And I know the Dutch people, they are very reasonable and relaxed. I have never seen the Dutch like they are now. And this is spilling over into Germany, into Spain, lots of other farmers, and also in the Netherlands itself. It's spreading from the farmers to the firemen, police even. It's becoming a battle between the people and this ideological leadership. But it's so bizarre because this is supposed to be a democracy, and yet the leadership is not responding to the people. David, what the hell do you think happened?
Well, this is where it looks like what happened in the Netherlands is actually a plan. And, a lot of the actual lower down politicians, it probably is incompetent because a lot of them aren't particularly clever. You see some of the people in our parliament, they don't seem to have too many brain cells. But, what they were trying to do in the Netherlands is actually implement something that looked like very, very planned, very organized, and something that they're trying out, that they will try to impose around the world if it works in the Netherlands. Just like we've seen over the last 2 years with lockdowns, the same thing happened in every country around the world. And then there was digital identity introduced in every country around the world. Travel restrictions, the same. So it looks like somebody is pulling the strings, whether it's the World Economic Forum or the Council for Foreign Relations or Vanguard and BlackRock, who are the big hedge funds that have shares in almost every big company around the world, or a combination of them. So obviously in the Netherlands, you've got this crazy situation where they said the farmers are not allowed to produce nitrogen anymore. Now, I actually think what they mean by that is not nitrogen itself, because that would be insane, because nitrogen's everywhere and it's harmless. I think they mean nitrogen containing compounds like ammonia and nitrogen dioxide, which are pollutants, but the farmers don't make much of it. But then it turns out that the World Economic Forum is ready to buy up the land of the farmers who will be put out of business because they can't meet the new nitrogen targets. And they want to buy the land so they can build new smart cities and then have more migration into the Netherlands, put everybody in these smart pods where they'll be wearing these virtual reality meta glasses, and they'll own nothing and be happy. And so, the farmers have risen up, which is wonderful. And, they are heroes. They're on the front line of this battle. But, I do see this in terms of this is almost like a war between the people and the governments that are controlled by something behind them, the deep state, whatever you call it. And it's very interesting today, or yesterday, Boris Johnson made a leaving speech in the parliament, and he talked about, for the first time ever, he mentioned the deep state wanted to work with Labour to get the UK back into the EU. It's a very bizarre thing for him to say, because he's never used that term before. But it's indicative that perhaps there is something of a deep state, which actually is waging war on the people, both socially, culturally, and economically, that wants to take our assets and ruin our society, ruin our culture, and ruin our economies.
Yeah, because what I notice is that the leadership classes across the West, they no longer act like representatives of the people, but rather act like a separate aristocracy. You take a politician like, for instance, Harry Truman, just to pull a name out of the hat. He was a haberdasher, which is a merchant. And he was from Missouri, and he felt that he represented the people of Missouri, even as president. And he was very conscious of the fact that he was a representative of his people. And as soon as he ended his political career, he scurried back to Missouri and ended his days there among his people. But it seems to me that the leadership classes today, all of the people in the leadership contest for the Tory party, Keir Starmer and everybody in Labour, it seems that they're part of a separate class that has no contact whatsoever with the people and the everyday concerns of the people. And I think of Vladimir Putin during the 90s. The 90s was less than 30 years ago. And during the 90s, at one point, he was so broke, even though he was a government functionary, but things were so chaotic in Russia that he had to earn extra money as a taxi driver, as I understand it. He had some contact with the people. I mean, he did not come from this rarefied class that was divorced from the common people. And I would venture to guess that that happened similarly to most of the people in the Russian leadership at this time, and the Ukrainian leadership as well. But in the Western leadership, it's as if they look at the people that they are supposed to represent as a conquered people that they rule over, like a conquering class of some sort. George, I'm hanging myself with this rope here. Help me out. Do you see where I'm
No,
coming from?
I agree with you. And the strange thing is that it's a kind of a self-anointed elite. I mean, these are people, yeah, some of them went to Ivy League schools and so on, but some of them didn't. But once they get into a particular profession, particularly the journalistic profession, they feel themselves to belong to this class, this elite group of people, and they have certain views and certain ideas about how the world should be organized, and they feel nothing but disdain for the rest of them. I mean, when that guy Peter Strzok, but what the hell is he? He's just some jerk off who was big shot in the FBI, and yet he's texting without hesitation. Doesn't think that there's something disgusting about saying, "Oh, the smelly people at Walmart's." How disgusting it is for him to have to share the space, this common space, with the smelly people at Walmart. And you think, how can anyone be so arrogant, to look down on your fellow man in this way? But that's what happens. I mean, when you reach this this particular level, then that's what you think. So that's why, when all of this Ursula von der Leyen and others, they just simply are talking among themselves. And they have no ability, none, to address any of the concerns of ordinary people, other than in the usual condescending way. I mean, when Hillary Clinton said something like, "Oh, Trump supporters, they're the basket of deplorables," she got herself into trouble because she blurted out something that you're not supposed to. I mean, if you're a politician, you're supposed to pretend to take seriously the concerns of the voters. You're not supposed to say in public, "I really think that these people are absolute idiots, and it's beneath my dignity even to listen to their complaints." But she blurted this out. But other politicians, slightly more skilled than Hillary Clinton, at least keep their mouths shut and don't say out loud what they're really thinking.
But because my concern about this whole situation is that they're going to start repressing people. Maria, you were going to say something.
Yes, it's fine. This discussion reminded me. I have recently wrote a small article. I published it on Telegram regarding what's going on in Italy. This situation around Mario Draghi. I am official nightmare of Mario Draghi. I was proclaimed so 1 month ago. Just one tweet I made. Okay, I'm serious. I was tweeting on that. I don't know if you followed me at that time, but it was a really very messy story. If you're interested, I will share it with you.
Yes,
But,
please do. Go ahead.
Okay, in April, I have published on Twitter a photo with Italian mines sent to Ukraine on 11th of March 2022. These mines were found in the storage of OSCE, and for me it was like a kind of shock that the neutral organization supports one side of the conflict, and so this side of the conflict is using their storage for storing the Italian mines. I didn't know anything about the parliamentarian vote regarding the arms. But it has appeared that the parliamentarian vote on the military support was on 18th of March 2022. So these mines were sent before this parliamentary vote, and this tweet was crazily spread all around the Italian social media. And the Italian Committee on Security and Intelligence, Copasir, started the investigation on the Putin's network in Italy. And they have proclaimed me the head of this network and a terrorist, information terrorist who have targeted, Mario Draghi personally with this tweet.
Wow.
So, wow.
And
tweets are violent.
Yeah, I appeared on the front page of Corriere della Sera together with, if I'm not mistaken, with 6 or 7 more Italians who are very well known and who are going against the mainstream, and suddenly my photo among them, and I'm the head of the Russian Putin's network. That's crazy.
Boys, David, George, we better be careful here. We've got an international terrorist. Her tweets are violent. You know, be careful. Be nice to her. You know, she's got the blue check mark, and her tweets are violent. Oh my God, what are we going to do? It's just ridiculous.
Crazy. It is ridiculous. It was crazy, really. And I have never been in Italy even in my life. And they saw that I am the head of this network, and I can do nothing. You know, I can't go to court and to defend myself there even. So they have chosen perfectly the victim. But what I wanted to say,
David, what do you think of this all craziness?
Oh my goodness, this is quite stunning, isn't it? They're just completely making something up. I mean, it shows they're completely paranoid, doesn't it? I mean, you just were telling a story, something that was true, and they spin it.
Exactly, David, because, you know, a self-confident leadership doesn't act this way. I mean, you are a head of a political party in the UK. You know or are aware of most of the people in leadership. These people don't seem self-confident, or am I mistaken somehow?
I think a lot of them are very paranoid about being attacked or being called something. So there's a whole level of groupthink there. But if you get through their shell, you know, their defensive shell, then they will lash out at you. You know, and I think they're terrified of the people seeing something that is really wrong about them and then reacting. And so they will always double down on what they've said before and attack ordinary, normal people who are just asking questions. You know, if I could sort of talk about the lockdown situation, because I'm sort of was involved with that. I was still a London Assembly member at the time. But I went to a lot of the demonstrations against lockdowns, and the government sent the police out to brutally put people down in a way that I've never, ever seen in the UK before, with riot police, helmets, batons, hitting people, peaceful protesters in the crowd in Trafalgar Square at a rally that I was speaking at. You know, it was supposedly an illegal rally because they put in a regulation to say people couldn't protest, and then they sent the police in hard and then tried to drag people through the courts, give them the organisers £10,000 fines, take them to the police station, strip search them, and all this kind of stuff. Really treating people absolutely brutally, you know, in a way that is tyrannical. So I'm glad, Maria, you're not actually in Italy. Who knows? These people are absolute tyrants, really. And you're supposed to be able to question people, ask questions in a free and democratic society, because they can never stop tiring of saying we're defending freedom and democracy, but when you use your freedom and democracy to challenge them, they come down on you hard.
They call it propaganda or disinformation.
Yeah,
always.
But it's very interesting, Gonzalo, what you said about the self-confident leadership, because you remember, again, back in the Cold War, people used to have a lot of fun about Soviet propaganda. People, oh, Pravda. But Pravda was available. There was, Pravda was never banned anywhere, because, oh, this is really funny, the way how Pravda or Izvestia reports things. But now, it's banned. RT is banned throughout Europe. I mean, you can't get hold of it. I mean, I think in the UK it's actually a crime. I mean, if you appear on an interview with RT, you could even be prosecuted. So it's completely outlawed. Now, can you imagine RT in comparison with the global reach of the Western media, the BBC, CNN, the Times, the Telegraph, the New York Times, Washington Post, all of these huge media outlets. RT is just tiny. And yet they are terrified of this tiny little outlet, and anybody at all might hear an alternative point of view. Now that doesn't show a great deal of self-confidence.
Well, no, I see it on YouTube, for instance. Right after the quote unquote massacre at this suburb outside of the capital of the country in conflict. I don't want to mention it because the algorithm on YouTube will pick it up and ban this video. But the one I'm talking about, the suburb outside of Kiev, that there was supposed to be a massacre in late March, early April. Around the 4th or 5th of April, I did a live stream about it, and I went through it, and I said, "This is nonsense. This is totally fabricated." And I went through the video images and so forth. I have a bit of a background in film production. That's where I started my trade as a writer in Hollywood, and I could see some of the production that had gone into the so-called massacre, and it looked staged to me. And I pointed out, some people had said that some videos showed that the people lying there were getting up and stuff like that. And I showed that was no, that was just artifacts of the video. It was not what people thought it was. But I did point out in this 2-hour live stream that this thing here, this is fake, and this over here, this is true, and it's not fake because of these reasons. Trying to give an even-handed appraisal of the situation. And my conclusion ultimately was that it was staged, and I have very good reasons for it, extremely good reasons, and nobody was paying me for it or anything of the sort. Or anyway, I just gave my honest appraisal, and because of this honest appraisal, the video was taken down, and I got into trouble with YouTube. And I am a trivial YouTuber. I'm a nobody. And yet there was this fear that anyone questioning, quote unquote, the narrative was a danger that had to be suppressed at all costs. The fact that I can't mention the name of this alleged massacre on this live stream that we're doing proves how paranoid they are of questioning anything. Because the truth, if it's true, you can question it till you're blue in the face. It's still going to remain true. And don't we want, as a society, to live with truths and not lies? But apparently, in the West, that is no longer the case with this leadership class. I'm sorry, Maria, I interrupted you. You were going to say something?
I just wanted to. I have started talking about Italy and about Italy regarding the recent commentary of one of the Italian parliamentary member of the parliament, who said that, commenting on the situation or the crisis in the country, she was not saying any word about the people, but she said that we must not disappoint our NATO allies. So it does.
Who cares?
Like, who cares about the people? But the only point of concern is what NATO is thinking about them, and that is crazy. Because if you are voting for for member of parliament, it means that this member of parliament should represent your interest, not the interest of another organization.
Exactly.
It seems that it's not the case at all in Italy, and I think in any country now.
Right.
Europe.
I think the same thing happened. I think when the last day or so of before Boris Johnson resigned, he was in Parliament, and then somebody asked him, "Is there any situation in which you would resign?" And he said, "Well, if I felt that I wasn't able to do everything I could on behalf of Ukraine, I would resign." So he actually identified that's his most important task, to do everything he could for Ukraine. Thank God he did it within 24 hours. But it's amazing that he thought, yeah, that's his most important job.
Well, actually, it's very indicative because there's a story going around, and David, perhaps you have some input on this. But the story I heard is that when Boris Johnson was getting ready to make his run for prime minister and whatnot, he was saying that he wanted to improve relations with Russia and tone down the tensions between the UK and Russia, which is a laudable goal, if you ask me. And he apparently had a meeting with intelligence officials, and apparently they read him the riot act, because as soon as that meeting ended, Johnson came out and a 180 change, and all of a sudden, Putin is evil and Russia is the enemy, and blah blah. So it seems when Boris Johnson says that that Ukraine is his most important priority, it's really that he's taking his marching orders from the deep state, from the entrenched bureaucrats who have the power to ruin any politician, and therefore they basically genuflect to these entrenched bureaucrats and carry out what they really want. It's just bizarre, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think this is what people find so shocking, I guess, in the UK and around the world. You've got there's some similar situations happening in other countries as well, is that we're brought up to believe that the people elect MPs, and the MPs are there working on their behalf, and the Prime Minister is there to serve the country. They're servants, not leaders, and they do what the people want. And then they stand on a certain manifesto, but every single time they get into power, and it's almost, not a day or two has gone past, and they completely renege on almost all of their promises and just do things that are different to what they said, and continue this sort of agenda and narratives that seem to come from somewhere else. And you mentioned intelligence services, but I think a body that is underestimated in its influence is the Council for Foreign Relations. Or Chatham House, which is in the UK. Very, very powerful organization that seems to direct or tries to direct.
Sorry, David, could you give a little background for our viewers who might not know about it? I mean, I'm aware of it. I think that we're all three aware of it, but it's a fairly obscure organization. And if you could give a little background.
Yeah, I don't know, all the details of the Council for Foreign Relations, but there are, I think, the major organization, the head is in London, and then they have branches around the world, but they seem to direct and try to manipulate foreign policy of the countries that have a branch of the Council for Foreign Relations. So they would have meetings with the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary in the UK regularly, and this would be to put the agendas of the military-industrial complex and vested interests that are behind the scenes that we don't see. Now, they meet in, I think, it's Chatham House. It's not also known as Chatham House, which people may be more familiar with. And they have a lot of discussion days and groups. It's essentially a think tank. But you go to some of their meetings and they have what's called Chatham House rules, where anyone can say anything and you're allowed to report on it, but you're not allowed to say who was there at the meetings. So it's supposed to be something that is completely secret, that nobody knows who is in what meetings and who said what. And
if you're a member of the Chatham House, you don't actually get invited to the really important meetings. I mean, back when I used to live in London, I actually joined Chatham House. But I was just too unimportant ever to be invited. So if the Chancellor of Germany comes to London and he addresses the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which is the Chatham House is, you don't get invited. I don't get invited. Only a very, very small select group of people get invited to talk to the Chancellor of Germany. And it's similar to in the Council of Foreign Relations in New York. I mean, it's a big, a lot of people join, but very, very few. It's only a very select group of people who get invited to the really important meetings. So the rest, they take your money. It's not cheap. You don't get invited to any of the interesting meetings.
My thinking is that it's the whole West, the United States, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand. They seem to be going off a cliff. And so here I want to pause a little bit. We've been going for about an hour, and I know, David, you wanted to bring up a specific topic that I'd like you to expound on, which is you wanted to mention the over-sexualization. I mean, I know this is a radical turn, but I figure that let's go off in a new direction. You wanted to talk about the over-sexualization of children in the UK. Please, what did you mean by that, and what's your concern?
Well, it is something that's related to what we talked about before with Maria. You're talking about the LGBT agenda and Russia sort of now finding patriotism back in the church and rejecting these kind of liberal ideologies. But in the West, it seems to be going in completely the other direction, which is probably what you might see. And I was a teacher for 20 years before I got involved in politics, when I qualified in 1995, and I was a teacher up to 2016, and then I stood down and when I got elected to the London Assembly. I was just a chemistry teacher, so I never really was involved in teaching this kind of things that are going into schools now. You would never even imagined some of these things going into schools. But the government passed a law in 2017. It's called the Children and Social Care Act, Children and Social Work Act, something like that. And it had in it a clause that was inserted by some Labour MPs that said children had to do this new subject called relationships and sex education. And the schools started teaching it. They had to teach it from 2020. Some of the schools voluntarily did it beforehand. And it was presented as just teaching children things they need to have healthy relationships. And, I taught reproduction because I was a science teacher. So you just thought, okay, well, this is reproduction. I taught it to children who were 12, 13 years old at an appropriate age. And there was nothing else around it. It was just straight reproduction. It was straight to biology. But what this is something I don't think a lot of parents realizing is it's going right down to the very youngest of children, 5-year-olds. And there's a huge element of LGBT ideology in this. So it's not just like teaching children reproduction at the 13. It's trying to teach people about same-sex relations at the age of 4 and 5. Teaching them about transgenderism at the age of 4 and 5, confusing boys and girls as to what a boy and a girl actually is, or whether they are boys or girls, and saying to them, oh, well, that you're not a boy or a girl because there's a thing called gender, which is different to biological sex, and you can change your gender whenever you want. And are you really a girl? Are you really a boy? And they use very, very clever cartoon picture books to try to get these ideas into children's heads at a very, very young age. So then they're not even engaging with it rationally, because at 4, 5, 6 years old, children don't have the brain capacity to deal with things in a rational way that you would have when you're 14 or 15.
Well, yeah, on top of that, at that age, you have no interest in sex or even understand sex. I think it's absurd.
Why would anyone want to teach these kind of things to children? And actually then on social media, on TikTok, you see all the time these younger teachers, and completely different kind of people that I'd ever come across before. I don't know what they've got into their heads at university, talking about how they had a great day because they came out to their children, or they told their children that they were trans, and the children in their class are primary school kids. And I think most people in the country are horrified when they hear the kind of things that are being taught to their children in primary schools, because people have a general innate trust of the state. I mean, I don't think I totally don't, seeing what the state is doing over the last 10 or 20 years. But generally, people trust teachers, people trust doctors, people trust the BBC, people trust their politicians. I don't know why, and they need to get out of it. But they have no idea of the things which are being taught to children in schools. And they're coming back with all kinds of terrible ideas. And there's been a lot of blowback about this when people have actually found out what's going on. And there have actually been some protests about this. And
the thing that, David, that this is coming to a head, this issue of the sexualization of children, it's not happening just in Britain, it's happening in the United States as well. And I do understand it's also happening in other countries of Western Europe. And this weird sexualization of children, but at the same time, we're having this issue of this incompetent leadership. At the same time, we're having this collapsing economy. It seems as if everything is coming to a head, as if everything is collapsing at the same time. Again, I'm interested, I want to ask Maria what she sees this, because I'm interested in the Russian point of view, the outsider point of view, because David, George, and myself were sort of like in the Western zeitgeist. But you, as somebody in Russia, with contacts in Russia, with educated people in Russia who observe the West, what do you all make of what's going on over here?
I just want to add regarding Europe, my friend is living in Germany, and her kids in the primary school, she got a summer reading and a book called Mohammed is Choosing the Pink Dress. So just the context.
Oh God.
Yes, it's crazy, and like how it is seen from Russia.
Well, I want to emphasize not just the issue that David brought up, which is deeply disturbing as far as I'm concerned. I'm a father myself. I have 2 children, and I don't want them to be involved in this insanity. Thank God they're not, because the kids are not in school in the West. I would not. That's part of the reason that I don't want to live in the West, because they're this whole ideology. But I'm interested in not just the children's sexualization, but the whole sense that the society in the West is collapsing. What's your view, Maria, from the Russian side of the fence?
From what I see, nobody is cheering up with that, and nobody is happy about that. Because despite the attempts to demonize the Russians, Russians are quite friendly people. And we know, like, Russians do not wish anybody bad to happen. And, now witnessing all what's going on and all these developments, and when and the news are like spreading quite fast, because such things as recently, I think it was in March, the teacher in Great Britain was fired for criticizing, transgenderism and etc. So such things are getting quite fast into the media here, and people are reacting quite, it's for them it's shock, because it's very difficult to understand how a person in adequate and educated can go along with such ideology and to feel absolutely okay with that. It's a matter of, if you are like, okay, if you are gay, it doesn't matter for anybody else but you. Who are you? If you have another person with you who is like you, okay, it's your like behind door life. Like, we don't go ourselves and do not demonstrate that we don't make parades of I would say it of noble couples, yes, men, women, etc. How we call it in English.
Heterosexual.
Yes, yes.
Heterosexual.
I missed it even in Russian. I forgot. Yes, and exactly, and it's like it's something such like abnormal, strange, and imposed, so that you have no right even to say anything against that. I had a friend who was working in a German company and who criticized LGBTQ ideology. He got a notice that if he repeats once again, he will be fired for just for expressing himself being against that. And not against the homosexual people, not against the transgenders, but against the propaganda and this attempt to impose this ideology on everybody, and no matter the age. That's how like people are reacting, and actually this consolidates people more around church and around classical values.
But
And
this is
even,
also
even there is just it came up to my mind. My friend, he's quite like much older than me. He has another friend. He's a French. He has 2 children. He left France. He moved to Russia, and he has business here now, and he gets like normal like life here, absolutely. And he moved here only because of the ideology, because he wants to raise children being Catholics. He wants to raise children in healthy atmosphere based on classical traditions and values. And he considered that Russia is the only country that still protects these values. And he moved here. Even we are Orthodox, Russians are Orthodox. He's Catholic, but he said that it's better for his kids here among the Orthodox Christians rather than among LGBTQ ideology fans.
right. This is why it's interesting, because Hungary is also kind of opposing this, and Hungary is being punished. I mean, it's being punished by the European Union. The European Union is denying funds to Hungary. Hungary is a small.
Poland also.
Poland also, exactly. Both Hungary and Poland, they are they're not the most prosperous countries in Europe. They're vulnerable economies. And the EU is now putting a lot of pressure on Hungary. Hungarian economy is in a lot of trouble, and the forint is just sinking like a rock. And I think partly out of the EU pressure and denying any funds. But what's kind of interesting, I think, just going back to what Maria said, is that, and why there's such opposition to Russia. I mean, or the Ukraine, politics, Putin, and everything else. But there's also a feeling that Russia represents a kind of traditional, classical view of life and liberty and family. And it might be a very attractive model to Europeans, because it might kind of remind them of what their countries were like 60 years ago. And they think, hey, it wasn't a bad place. If you go back 50, 60 years, our countries were kind of nice places. And we'd like to have a little bit of that. People respecting families, people like traditional values and so on. We want to go back to that, because many of these countries were like that. I mean, again, propaganda, kind of LGBTQ propaganda was banned. In Great Britain and many countries. Yes, you can. They legalized homosexuality back in the 60s, but that didn't mean that you could just go to any school and start, advocating on behalf of, of gay lifestyles or trans or anything like that. So they look at Russia and they think, hey, this might be an attractive model. We don't want to start giving people ideas. And I think a lot of the demonization of Russia, I think, has to do something with that.
I think on the grassroots, people do want that. I mean, I run the Heritage Party. I think we're about the only party that actually advocates for traditional family values and protecting children from this kind of propaganda and sexualizing material. And you talk to people outside of the London political media bubble, and everybody hates what they're pushing and wants to return to a country we had before. I mean, people really are nostalgic for what we had in this country before all of this nasty side of liberalism, this progressive liberalism, has taken over. And this is the thing, as Gonzalo mentioned before, that there's such suppression of anybody who tries to go against the narratives and agendas, that these people are not willing to allow even one person to have a different opinion. It's almost like Big Brother with Winston Smith. They were so scared of just one person having a different opinion. They must be terrified of a whole country like Russia now having traditional values, wholesome living, and don't want people to have that in what has become the cesspit that the West is.
Yeah, David, what I notice is that the leadership class has this duality towards the bulk of the people in the democracies, in the UK, in your case, in that the leadership on the one hand has contempt for the common people and the values that the common people desire, and yet at the same time they're afraid of them. And I think that they suspect that they are wrong. The leadership class knows that they are on the wrong path. And so that's why they want to silence any kind of dissenting voice. Because you see, if you're confident in where you are going, like George said before, when the West was very confident about where it was going during the Cold War, it didn't have a problem with Pravda. It didn't have a problem with having Izvestia being published in the West. Because there was a self-confidence that, yes, we're on the right track and we don't have to worry about it. But when you're on the wrong track, that's when you want to silence anybody. But what I find interesting is that on the one hand, contempt for the common people and the very quotidian and wholesome aspirations of the common people, which is to have a healthy family, to raise healthy children, which is perfectly normal and wholesome and good, and is necessary for a flourishing society, but they have contempt for that, and yet at the same time they fear that. It's this very interesting duality of like I said, like an aristocracy looking down on the people. Yeah. Listen, we've been going on for an hour and 20 minutes, and it's growing dark. And I always think that it's the secret to a long life is knowing when it's time to go. So what I wanted to do is do a final round, and I'd ask each of you in turn to talk about whatever is most on your mind at this time, to give us all something to think about before we go. Who would like to go first?
Ladies first, yeah.
Yeah? Well, I'll tell you what is on my mind at this time. The thing that's concerning. As you know, I'm here in Kharkov in Ukraine, and my great concern is I hear the shelling every day, every evening especially, and the war is quite close. And my great concern about Ukraine is a beautiful country, lovely, lovely people, just salt of the earth. And my great fear and my horror is that the flower of Ukraine youth, the young men of this country, are being killed for nothing, and that the Ukraine nation will never recover from this catastrophe, which was a catastrophe of the Western of the West's making. I know exactly whom to blame. It was NATO, the European Union, the United States that led the Ukraine down the primrose path, and here we are. And I understand completely why Russia carried out its special military operation. And to tell you the truth, if I had been in the shoes of Mr. Putin, I would have carried it out earlier, because there had been too many provocations for too long, and it was very clear what was happening. But be that as it may, my great concern is that the Ukraine leadership will not negotiate, and they will throw away Ukrainian lives for nothing, and it will destroy the nation. That's the thing that's uppermost on my mind, and it truly breaks my heart that this seems to be the fate of Ukraine, because it's very clear that the Russian armed forces are winning decisively, and every day that passes, the casualties are for nothing. And that's the thing that just breaks my heart. All these young men dying for no reason other than the hubris of the West and the Zelensky regime. That's my thought. That's what's uppermost in my mind at this time. You guys, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I'll go now if you like.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I totally agree with everything you've said, and I speak out against the insanity of trying to pursue this war from the UK as well. But related to that, We started off this by talking about the leadership contest for the Conservative Party in the UK. Obviously, that's going to affect us here immensely because whoever wins it is going to be the next Prime Minister. And it's very good that Boris and his wife, Carrie, who has a very big influence on him for the good, have gone from 10 Downing Street, but whoever's coming next is going to be worse. So I think we are in for some very hard times in the UK, particularly over this winter and over the next couple of years, maybe until we have another election and we can try to get rid of them. But all the political parties in power in Parliament in the UK, Tory, Labour, Lib Dem, Green, SNP, they're all the same, and they're all leading our country to destruction in 20 different ways, whether it's net zero, the war in Ukraine, LGBT, mass abortion, mass immigration, economic destruction, all these different ways. But I'm trying to build the alternative. So I just will say a little bit of a, plug for my own party, if you like, the Heritage Party.
Absolutely.
There is an alternative, and I know some people who have been fighting for freedom over the last 2 years they want freedom, but are saying, well, the politics, there's no point in getting involved because they're all the same and it's never going to change. But you've got to have the attitude, yes, we can change it, and it might be hard, and it might be running a marathon, it might be climbing a mountain, but you've got to take the first step up the mountain. You've got to take the first stride in the race, otherwise you're never going to win the race. And we might be like the tortoise against the hare, but we have got to start out to have a chance of winning. So if you are really concerned now today with what's gone on with the leadership contest and who the next Prime Minister is going to be, get up and act, get involved. Please come and join me in the Heritage Party. We'll help you to get involved, and you can positively do something to make a change in politics, to restore it to where it should be, so that politics serves the people once again, rather than the people being seen as the serfs of the politicians.
Absolutely. Fully endorse the sentiment.
Thank you.
George?
Yeah, I would only just say that I've been very disappointed in the commentary on what's going on in Russia and Ukraine on the part of analysts from whom one would have expected more sensible comments.
They're lying their asses off. It's
right.
ridiculous.
I'm talking. I don't care about the New York Times and so on. I'm talking about somebody like John Mearsheimer. He's eminent political scientist. International stature. But the problem is that people like that don't seem to appreciate the exercise of power. They think that all they need to do is say, Russia, invaded illegally. It was unjust. It was a crime or whatever. But they don't really appreciate what's most important, which is what was Russia supposed to do?
Yeah.
In other words,
I agree.
The issue of diplomacy had been on the agenda for 8 years. You just to keep saying, it was illegal, it was a crime, it was this is unjustified, it was unprovoked and whatever. Well, what was the alternative? What else could Russia have done? Because if Russia had just simply let this go, Russia would have just essentially ceased to be any kind of a serious power, because it would have been encircled. And that was always the agenda, encirclement of Russia, the essential elimination and destruction of Russia as any kind of a force in the world. It was a slow, steady policy pursued by the United States, through NATO, essentially sees the Black Sea to be a NATO lake, the Baltic Sea to be in the NATO lake, the White Sea to be a NATO lake, everything surrounded by NATO. What was Russia supposed to do? And so people like Mearsheimer, again, I'm going by him because he's so eminent. They don't seem to appreciate that. Instead, they say, Russia acted irrationally, but on the other hand, great powers act irrationally. I don't
No,
see
I don't. I
irrational
don't see that irrationality at all insofar as Russia's actions. But I agree with you that
and
maybe
that's it. And I think that, you know, much of the sort of the commentary that appears in supposedly the critical websites like antiwar.com or the American Conservative or Responsible Statecraft and all these other things, you know, they think, oh, we're very critical of U.S. foreign policy, but none of them really addresses the issue. What else could Russia do on February 9th of this year? And if you're not able to address that, then it's best if you just get
well,
quiet.
you know, George, I think that what happens is that, and part of the problem of the leadership class in its totality in the West is that they are unable to put themselves in the shoes of the other. Because like the people that you're mentioning, for instance, yeah, they're very critical of U.S. foreign policy, but they fall for the same flaw of the Western leadership class of not being able to put themselves in the shoes of the other. Like I said before, had I been Vladimir Putin, which won't happen in a million years, but had I been, I would have instigated this special military operation earlier, because the provocation was very clear. The number of Ukraine soldiers that were being trained by NATO to NATO standards was just becoming absurd. And the fact that years were passing by and nothing was being implemented insofar as Minsk II, all of this would show to me that NATO was planning on using Ukraine as a base to harm Russia. How exactly they planned on doing that, that's irrelevant. The intention was clear. And so but I completely understand that Putin was acting in the best interests of the Russian people, because they're his people. But the Western analysts, even the more sophisticated ones, I agree with you, they can't seem to understand that. They can't seem to understand that it's not just Putin. By the way, we keep saying Putin, or in this conversation I have been, but it's really the entire Russian leadership class that is pretty much on board. And nobody in the West seems to be able to put themselves in their shoes. And that blindness, I think, is remarkable. And it is indicative of some flaw in Western leadership, which I personally am very interested in. I'm actually working on a project based on that issue, because it's a blindness, an inability to see the point of view of the other and act in this arrogant, dismissive way of just, my way or the highway. Like
I
the
think
sanction.
and I think that with Mearsheimer, he says Russia behaved irrationally, but then because he's a critic, he says, yeah, but the Americans have behaved irrationally as well in the past. But where's the symmetry? I mean, America, went and destroyed tiny little Nicaragua. They thought that was a major strategic threat to the United States back in the 1980s. That's little Nicaragua, and there were no Soviet bases there. It was not part of any Soviet-led military alliance. That's what, with the United States. The United States shipped soldiers 10,000 miles to Vietnam because the security of the United States was threatened if the communists were to win in Southeast Asia. So where's the symmetry? Right.
Well,
that was a real, direct, immediate threat. And you can't just simply say, oh, well, they behaved as irrationally as the Americans did. No. That was a completely different thing. Again, America went off, 10,000 miles to Iraq because Saddam Hussein was a huge threat. So, if America can do all of that and Russia can't do something that's right there on its border, again,
what I've said repeatedly is
this is Mearsheimer, the critical voices.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've said what would happen in the United States if, say, China started training Mexican troops and started making noises about invading New Mexico and taking New Mexico and California back for Mexico. The people in the United States would have a complete meltdown, justifiably so. I'm sorry. So, Maria, we will give you the final word.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to what George was saying and you. It's not only the matter of NATO proliferation and that immense threat to Russia, but it's also the war's plan to start the assault on Donbass. by the Ukrainian troops. And in this case, nobody was thinking about the civilian lives, and nobody was thinking about them since 2014. And nobody was protecting them. And in this case, even Russia, if we intervene postwards after the start of the assault, it would be really impossible to stop it, taking into account how the Ukrainian troops were equipped and taking how the strongholds were equipped. So it's harder to start, to stop your adversary when he's moving from protected areas. So this should not be forgotten. But what I'm thinking about, I'm like you, Gonzalo, I'm thinking about the people because, I'm working, as I was telling you, I'm working on the documentary. And the most painful thing for me is, and for the people who are dying since 2014 under the shelling and indiscriminate shelling, about the children, about the old people who are suffering. And we are reading frequently the news and we see the numbers, but we don't understand, many of us don't understand that behind every number, there is a name. And behind every name, there is a person. And behind every person, there is a story. And this story, if you listen to them, if people go to the ground and listen to what people are sharing and how they're living, this is giving shivers. And the only desire you might have after going there is to stop this war and to make the West understand what they are doing, fueling this conflict. That's what I'm thinking of, and that's what is breaking my heart, really.
And with that, very well said, Maria. And with that, I will bid you all goodbye. So thank you to my guests. It's been a real pleasure. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. And to chat, I hope you had a good time with this conversation with these fascinating people. Below in the description, you'll find links to where you can find them. They're on Twitter and Telegram. And from those links, you can find all of their work. Please check them out. And if you're in the UK, please check out the Heritage Party. I think that David is doing a great job, and all support to him and all the best wishes, especially in these very challenging times in the UK. George, Maria, David, thank you so much for joining, and chat. Thanks very much. Oh, and by the way, chat, so that you know, on Thursday, I'll be doing a roundtable with Brian from the New Atlas and Armchair Warlord. And we're going to be discussing, guess what we're going to be discussing? Warfare. Yeah. Good old blowing stuff up. Yeah. So anyway, thank you very much, Maria, David, George, and I will catch you next time.
Thank you.